Did the Men of Stone become the Mechanicus? That's what we will discuss today. We'll look at the early history of the Mechanicus, how it survived Old Night and recovered technology from the Dark Age on Terra, and look for any signs of the Men of Stone. And in connection with this, we also have to ask, who might the Men of Iron see as the omnisiah? So, welcome friends to another 40k video. Let's begin. Largely this lore draws on dark heresy, the Lathe Worlds and heresy betrayal. Before we cover the lore, why do I think that the Men of Stone might have sheltered on Mars after the revolt of the Iron Men? Apart from the part mechanical, part human combination, which is an easy comparison, it's also the philosophy they share. The Men of Stone led the Dark Age Empire, created AI to protect it, and that AI turned on its creators. Then Old Night happened, and the nature of the Mechanicus can tie into this. The Stone Men augments reflect each other, and so they retain that core part of themselves and their beliefs in technology, but they see the mistake of full AI, and so like themselves ensure to keep the human part to not repeat the revolt, and we get machine spirits in place of full AI, servitors instead of automated systems, and so on. That human control is maintained. No full AI is trusted. In fact, this is entrenched in their religion. Nothing will be made to mimic a sentient mind. That's my thinking. Now into the lore. If records dating back to those years can be said to be fragmentary, those of the Age of Strife are no more than dust. What little is known implies that two catastrophic events occurred. First, the emergence of uncontrolled psychers, unleashed plagues of warp-dwelling entities, and demonic possession on many worlds. Second, great warp storms engulfed the galaxy in this period, and rendered interstellar travel virtually impossible. The vast empire of early man collapsed almost overnight into isolated worlds that quickly regressed technologically. Sensing mankind's weakness, foul aliens invaded and enslaved many of the surviving enclaves, even as ravening warp-spawned demons claimed others. This all comes after the cybernetic revolt, when the creators of the Men of Iron fought their creations. Even Mars and Earth were beset, and initially fought one another for possession of the few resources left in the solar system. However, famine quickly devastated the vast population of both worlds, and the weakened remnants were reduced to little more than a form of techno-barbarism, with individual warlords squabbling over domination of their own territories. It appears that on Mars, the technologies that had permitted its settlement were either forgotten or lost, and the whole planet teetered at the edge of extinction as its terraforming broke down. As the tech priests tell it, in this their darkest hour, a new creed emerged among the Martians or Men of Stone. It was a creed of survival based around selfless dedication to a higher purpose, and it bound the last true men together against the anarchy that beset them. Science became their religion, and the cult of the machine god emerged to be their ward against the encroaching darkness. It is said that the first devotees of the machine god undertook terrible risks to seek out fragments of technology from their devastated cities. Perhaps some of the Men of Stone went to retake things they had lost, vital bits of technology that would help them survive in this chaotic time. The tech priests recall that their forebears used what they learned to set up protected enclaves that could shelter them against the continued rad storms. They knew that worlds harboured many secrets, and that some of the warring barbarians of ancient Earth would be able to glean these and use them for themselves, perhaps one day falling upon Mars in their savagery. For centuries they sought to plunder and steal what technologies they could, but they were also fixated with the fate that had befallen the wider human galaxy. Piece by piece, they must have set about rebuilding oxygen recyclers, moisture traps and food processors that would be necessary to support themselves in the long term on an increasingly hostile Mars. Betrayal also says famine and war swiftly followed the war, worsening as through damage and neglect. Planetary radiation shields and macro-industrial plants failed and poisoned the planet further. Why did they fail? Might they have been run by the now all but extinct men of iron, and without that mind there, things fall down. I think it's in one of the Warhammer horror novels. There's a story, an investigator looks into something like a manufactorum, and an AI secretly runs it. And as people look into things, when it finds out an AI is behind what is happening there, it murders them. So something like that, but for the machines that exist on Mars. This murdered what fragile ecosystem had been sustained over the millennia. And this was a Mars that was one of the first places terraformed during the Dark Age, so you can imagine its fall from that point to where it ends up. The enclaves had barely enough space for the devotees of the machine god, and none at all for unbelievers. It can be imagined that mutants and marauders frequently assailed the hastily built shelters, and perhaps some of the earliest were wiped out. Yet, after every setback, the followers of the machine god learned and rebuilt. Perhaps they were in some small way men of stone and were able to defend themselves. We have an example of the Tabula Myriad, which is a abominable intelligence. It emerges during the heresy, and essentially it can actually use its cold logic to get rid of warp corruption. So perhaps if the men of stone built that, they could employ something like that. And we do have a lot of evidence of Dark Age of technology, things that can actually help combat chaos. So just thinking along those lines to protect these shelters. Anyway, on with the lore. Horus Heresy Betrayal expands on these threats, saying when they emerged, scattered cannibals, rad mutated creatures, and half-insane automata and false minds haunted the benighted surface. Perhaps some remnants of the AI that ran things on Mars, or some final loyal men of iron that were abandoned for the danger. That's what automata and false minds bring to mind for me. The cult of the machine god demanded absolute devotion and self-sacrifice from its followers, and to them a functioning machine became more valuable than the lives of many men. This feels in line with the little we know about the men of stone, especially at this point, after what they'd created had gone astray. From the earliest records, it appears that the priesthood of Mars grew in strength and confidence, and the scattered enclaves began to unite and share their knowledge. Every partial database or ruined document was carefully preserved and added to their store of understanding. Every broken machine was examined, catalogued and collected. To the devotees of the machine god, their survival through dark times was nothing less than miraculous, an event divinely inspired by the god in the machine. The savants with the greatest understanding of tech saw themselves as tech priests, prophets able to interpret the will of the machine god through the rattle of cogitators and the whine of compressors. The reward for their dedication was manifest to all. They could communicate with the machine spirit present in every mechanism and persuade them to do their bidding. And just in terms of me saying that the men of stone was somehow there at the beginning of the Mechanicus, I'm not saying all of them, perhaps just a few that led the way at this time. Perhaps they were the leadership, and over time, as more added, there were layers of leadership put into place. The cult of the machine god adopted the name Mechanicum for themselves. Disciples of the machine god. As their philosophy developed, the tech priests came to realize that knowledge itself was the purest expression of divinity. That meant any object or being that was a receptacle of knowledge became in some part holy. A data stack or machine intelligence that carried knowledge from ancient times was no less divine than a man of flesh and blood. Indeed, they began to see men as organic machines, subject to many failings, with their only true worth lying in the knowledge they accumulated through the application of intellect, a view perhaps shared as the men of stone, who had viewed at the time of their fall as a ruling class, like the godmen before them. The tech priests pushed themselves ever harder to overcome the weaknesses of the flesh and became more akin to machines, logical and dispassionate, untroubled by passion or emotion. Bionic replacement and augmentation became increasingly commonplace as they sought to emulate machine kind. This style echoed my own thoughts of the Men of Stone, mainly taken from the short story Ancient History. It's not named, but implied that Kron, someone in that story, is a man of stone. The Men of Stone needed to be part mechanical, as one of their first tasks was to go out into the galaxy and explore on ships, to guide them, and be less of a lure for things in the warp, as they had a low level of soul. They built Mars, building places for machines, not men. like they once might have done, guiding ships across the galaxy. They would serve the machines now, though, and over time, during the brief lulls between the warp storms, it would be possible to send machines through the warp and out into the wider galaxy once again. They rebuilt their fleets and tried to find fallen worlds. They linked with Terra, accepted the Emperor as the omnisiah too, and that alliance became the centre of the Imperium. I think over time, as their membership grew, that kernel of the Men of Stone will have been lost as they moved on or went into hiding, and so those later additions kept the Men of Stone tenant, but began to believe as someone else as the omnisiah. So that's my theory, and I can't really fit the Dragon of Mars into it, to be honest. Now, the last two bits of lore I couldn't fit into the main video. In Men of Iron by Guy Haley, where a Iron Man, the robot in reference, it says this to Omegos of the Mechanicus: I have met the omnisiah, the actual one, not the earthling corpse. He would find you extremely disappointing. If UR-025 had had the capacity to sigh, it would have done so. So perhaps it's referring to some sort of past creator, a Man of Stone, that would have been the omnisiah for the Men of Iron. Now take this next bit with a pinch of salt. I've seen it quoted a lot, but not sourced. It goes like this. Laurie Golding, who works for Black Library, had heard from Alan Merritt, who also works at GW, in an interview that he defined the Dark Age races or leaders like this. The Golden Men were a genetically engineered master race with selective breeding, kind of like in Dune. The Iron Men were obviously machines. The Stone Men in Stone Men refers to silicon, as in they are organic intelligence created artificially. I like to think of them like the 13th tribe from Battlestar Galactica, the quote goes, and it ends with the organic Cylons who left Kobol and began their own civilization. And I just want to tie this into the name that the Men of Iron or abominable intelligences can be given in the time of 40k. If the Men of Stone are made from some sort of silicon, then the name Silica can be used to tie into Silica Animus for Men of Stone and their creations. Animus can mean the motivation to do something. Could that be some name the Men of Stone gave the AI, with the idea they would fulfill tasks for them? Bit of a stretch, but an interesting connection, so I thought I'd drop that here. And if you like this video on 40k, then why not try this one? And if you want a load of videos on 40k, I've got a long playlist on the channel. There's one with everything and one focusing on the Dark Age of technology. And I think my voice is about to pack in, so I will end the video there.